The Cowboys haven't stepped foot onto the field for an NFC Championship game since January of 1996. We're talking about nearly 30 years of silence from the most famous franchise in football and the highest valued sports team on the planet. Every single season follows pretty much the exact same script, where they put up a pretty good to great regular season, flame out early in the playoffs, and then fill the offseason with a bunch of nonsense and noise. When you look at the 3 decades of going nowhere, one name sits at the center of the stagnation. Jerry Jones is the sole reason for this. He acts as the owner and the general manager throughout this entire cycle. This isn't a story about bad luck or lack of talent on the roster. It's about one man's need to control the narrative and the massive price paid for his ego. How does 30 years go by and not a conference championship appearance happens in that amount of time for a franchise this famous? We have to go back to 1994 to where Jerry set this precedent, and he's been following it ever since. His very first move involved firing Tom Landry, a Hall of Fame legend who was the only head coach the city had ever known. To replace him, Jerry brought in Jimmy Johnson, his old college teammate from Arkansas, and they struck a very simple deal. Jerry would handle the business side while Jimmy ran the football operations. That agreement stands as the most important moment in the history of the franchise because it worked perfectly until Jerry decided to blow it up anyway. The rebuild happened at lightning speed as the team went from a 1-15 record in 1989 to winning back-to-back Super Bowls in 1992 and 1993. Johnson was the architect who pulled off the Herschel Walker trade and stockpiled the draft picks used to build a roster from scratch. He put together a core of Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin that became one of the best teams the NFL had ever seen. Jerry made sure he was there for every second of the glory by cutting ribbons and holding weekly press conferences during the season. He even insisted on having cameras in the draft war room so he could show himself making decisions on live TV. Johnson mostly let it slide, but the tension was building behind the scenes. Everything changed in March of 1994 during the league meetings in Orlando. The Cowboys were fresh off their second straight championship and a dynasty was clearly in progress. Most reports suggested that Jimmy was tired of fighting for credit, but he had no real plans to walk away from the team. The breaking point came at a dinner in Orlando when Jerry reportedly had a few too many drinks and wandered over to a table where Johnson was eating with former assistants. Jerry tried to propose a toast and the table went completely cold. Later that night, Jerry told 2 reporters from the Dallas Morning News that there were 500 coaches who could have won the Super Bowl with that roster. Once Jimmy heard those words, the relationship was over. By the end of March, the most successful coaching tenure in the history of the Cowboys ended with a $2 million buyout. This didn't happen because of a losing record or a disagreement over which players to draft. It happened because Jerry simply couldn't share the spotlight at the very peak of a dynasty. To fill the void, Jerry hired Barry Switzer, another friend from Arkansas who hadn't coached a game in 5 years. Switzer took over the same roster Johnson built to a 12-4 record and eventually won the Super Bowl in 1995. Jerry asked God to just give him that one and he'll never ask for another Super Bowl again. Words that would haunt him. He used that trophy as proof that his theory was correct and that the head coach was secondary to the talent he provided. In his mind, that win proved he was the reason for the success, and he has operated under that belief ever since. The real tragedy is what that Super Bowl win taught him about how to run a football team. He convinced himself that a compliant coach could win as long as the roster was stacked with talent. From that moment on, the template was set to hire coaches who needed Jerry more than Jerry needed them. But this logic works fine until you run out of the players that Jimmy Johnson left behind. After that 1995 season, the magic disappeared and the Cowboys haven't found it since. After nearly 20 years of hitting that exact same ceiling, something happened in 2016. The Cowboys didn't make a bold move or do it on purpose, but they happened to fall into their next franchise QB. After Barry Switzer left, Jerry started going through head coaches the way most teams burn through backup quarterbacks. Chan Gailey only lasted 2 seasons before getting the boot, and Dave Campo followed that up by going 15-33 over a miserable 3-year stretch. Bill Parcells eventually came in to stabilize things by going 34-32, which got the Cowboys back to the playoffs twice, but he walked away because he couldn't deal with Jerry's constant front office interference anymore. Wade Phillips took over the reins in 2007 and immediately went 13-3. Yet he lost in the divisional round to the eventual Super Bowl champ, New York Giants. Phillips was eventually fired mid-season in 2010 after a 1-7 start that left the team in shambles only 11 games into the schedule. Through all that chaos, the Cowboys had found Tony Romo. If you want to see how much potential was wasted during this era, just look at what Romo managed to do while playing for such a dysfunctional organization. He finished with a 78-49 career record, made 4 Pro Bowls, and earned 6 playoff appearances while maintaining a passer rating that stayed near the top of the league throughout his entire career. Despite those stats, he never reached a single conference title game. Tony made it to the divisional round 3 times and lost every single one of them. When you look back, Romo wasn't always the problem in those games. The team was never built to go the distance because resources either went to the wrong players or the wrong coaches. That leads us directly to the Jason Garrett era. When Phillips got the axe in 2010, Garrett took over as an interim, finished the season 5-3, and Jerry decided to give him the permanent job. That move made sense at the time, but then Garrett missed the playoffs entirely in 2011, 2012, and 2013. Jerry gave him a contract extension anyway because Garrett was exactly what he wanted in a coach. He never challenged Jerry in public and never fought against roster decisions, which allowed Jones to remain the central figure in every conversation about the team. The Cowboys eventually made the playoffs 3 times under Jason Garrett in 2014, 16, and 18, but they lost in the divisional round every single time. 2 of those years were heartbreaking losses against the Green Bay Packers. The rest of the Garrett years were defined by mediocre 8-8 seasons where a roster full of talent at quarterback and running back couldn't beat good opponents. By the time 2019 rolled around, Dallas went 8-8 again and missed the postseason, which finally forced Jerry to let go of Garrett. It took 10 years for that to happen, which is ridiculous, and Jerry only moved on because the contract expired and he could no longer defend the decision to the public. This is the core pattern of Jerry Jones, because he doesn't fire people when the scoreboard actually tells him to. He only fires them when the optics become too embarrassing to ignore. Jason should have been gone by 2016, but he lasted 3 more years because he never stole the spotlight from his boss. We saw 2 decades of different coaches hitting the exact same ceiling, and at no point during those 20 years did Jerry look at his own decision making as the one variable that actually needed to change. Before the Cowboys could even build on the momentum that Dak and Zeke had set the previous season, the 2017 offseason turned into a total circus. Dak Prescott was drafted out of Mississippi State, and the truth is, the Cowboys weren't even sure they wanted him on the roster. They spent the whole pre-draft process chasing Paxton Lynch of all people, and even tried to trade up for him in the first round. But they failed and watched Denver take him 1 pick before they could. Dallas took a defensive end instead, and then tried to grab Connor Cook at pick 101, but the Raiders snatched him up 1 spot early. Finally, at pick 135, they used a compensatory 4th-round selection to take back Prescott almost because they had no other options left. Dak eventually tattooed that pick on his wrist because he never forgot that he was the backup plan. Ezekiel Elliott was a different story, however, because he was the 4th overall pick in that very same draft. Jerry had been dreaming about him since the beginning of college. As a bell cow back from Ohio State, he put up 1,631 rushing yards as a rookie and led the entire league in rushing. Jerry built the whole offense around Zeke and a dominant offensive line, and the plan worked exactly how it should when you spend that much draft capital in the right spots. However, Dak was the reason that the trajectory of this franchise changed. He threw 33 touchdowns against only 4 interceptions with a 67% completion percentage, leading the team to a 13-3 record and the best seed in the NFC. Winning Offensive Rookie of the Year showed everyone he was calm and accurate under pressure. He made it look like the Cowboys had finally solved the problem from the Romo years by finding a quarterback who could lead a complete team instead of trying to carry a broken one. With 2 rookies playing at an MVP level, the Cowboys suddenly had the kind of foundation you use to build a dynasty. Both stars were only 23 years old, and it felt like the championship window wasn't just opening, but it was already open. Then came the divisional round against the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers made an unbelievable throw to Jared Cook along the sideline with only a few seconds left, and the 51-yard gain set up a field goal that sent Dallas home with a 34-31 loss. It was a painful exit. Nobody in the building panicked because losing a game close to Aaron Rodgers when he's playing out of his mind happens to everyone. Dak and Zeke were still young, and the offensive line was still elite, and the talent across the roster was undeniable. Shout out Jeff Heath. What nobody realized in that locker room was that the talent on the field wouldn't matter as much as the organization running it. The Cowboys were entering an 8-year stretch where the football was good enough to win, but something kept getting in the way of success at each turn. Every contract negotiation turned into a massive media saga, and every coaching search became a televised event. Every single personnel decision was filtered through the exact same question Jerry had been asking since 1994, which is who gets the credit for the success? The answer to that question is always the same, and unfortunately for the fans, but fortunately for me, the results on the field keep following the same ego-driven path. Before the Cowboys could even build on the momentum that Dak and Zeke had set the previous season, the 2017 offseason turned into a total circus. The NFL announced a 6-game suspension for Ezekiel Elliott following a domestic violence investigation involving his former girlfriend. Even though prosecutors in Columbus had already passed on filing charges the year before, the league ran its own private investigation and decided there was enough evidence to bench him under the personnel conduct policy. Elliott denied everything, but the legal battle that followed dragged through courts and arbitration for months on end. Jerry Jones didn't just disagree with the league, he went to war. He didn't do it quietly or through back channels, but instead he chose to be very loud at every single microphone he could find. He attacked the NFL's process and questioned how they could handle this case, effectively making himself the public face of the fight for a star player. While the Cowboys were actually trying to play a football season, their owner was busy with press conferences, radio hits, and legal statements. Zeke finally gave up his appeals in November to serve the remaining game suspension, and Dallas finished with a mediocre 9-7 record to miss the playoffs. Jerry spent the entire fall fighting Roger Goodell instead of focusing on his football team, and the product on the field suffered for it. The team managed to rebound in 2018 with a 10-6 record, which included a wildcard win against Seattle before they lost to the Rams in the divisional round. It was the same ceiling they always hit, but at least they were back in the conversation. Then came the offseason that really shows you how Jerry Jones operates when there's nobody around to tell him no. Zeke wanted a new deal despite having 2 years left on his rookie contract, so he decided to skip training camp and head to Cabo until he got paid. Rather than handling this behind closed doors, Jerry turned the holdout into the longest running soap opera of the preseason. Every time he talked to the media that summer, someone asked him about Zeke, and Jerry was more than happy to give a long, rambling answer. He would hint that a deal was almost done, then suggest that the team just might move on without him, only to turn around and say it was close again. This went on for 6 weeks, until the Cowboys finally caved in September, giving Zeke a 6-year, $90 million deal that made him the highest paid back in the league. That same summer, the front office gave Jalen Smith a 5-year extension worth $64 million. Smith was a second-round pick back in 2016 who had missed his entire rookie year after a horrific knee injury at Notre Dame. He had shown some flashes for sure by 2019, but he was still dealing with the nerve damage that clearly affected his play on the field. The contract didn't reflect what a proven linebacker should earn, but it definitely reflected Jerry's confidence that he saw something the rest of the market was missing. This is a move that Jerry makes over and over again, where he bets big on a player because it feels right in his gut, rather than because the stats actually back it up. The Cowboys stumbled to an 8-8 record that year and missed the playoffs for the second time in 3 seasons, which led Jerry to finally firing Jason Garrett. We've already talked about that move, but what happens after is what actually matters. The Mike McCarthy hire wasn't just a coaching change, it was a window into how Jerry views his own role as a guy in charge. McCarthy had been out the league for a full year after Green Bay let him go following the 2018 season. He reportedly spent that time studying new offensive trends to prepare for his next shot at a head coaching job. When he sat down to interview with the Cowboys, he came in with a sharp, detailed vision for the offense, and Jerry hired him within a few days. There wasn't a long search or 10 different interviews because Jerry talked to Marvin Lewis and Mike McCarthy and then decided he was done. The thing is, McCarthy was a Super Bowl winner who had spent 13 years developing Aaron Rodgers. He wanted back into the NFL badly, and the Cowboys were the only ones offering that specific chance. Even though Mike McCarthy would later eventually admit that he was lying in his interview and say that he didn't really study that much, Jerry never misses the dynamic of a proven coach who genuinely needs a job to stay relevant. It's a version of the savior complex that works for him, where Jerry isn't rescuing a broken player, but instead acting as the man who gives a winner a second act. McCarthy needed Dallas way more than Dallas needed any specific coach, and Jerry realized that from their very first conversation. With Mike McCarthy now in the building, the Cowboys looked loaded. They had Dak, CeeDee Lamb, a healthy offensive line, and Micah Parsons coming in 2021. On paper, this looked like the best team since the 1990s dynasty. Instead of a deep run, the fans got 3 straight years of 12-win seasons that ended in early exits, mostly because the front office kept making decisions that undermined the team. The trouble started before Mike McCarthy even stepped foot in his first game in Dallas. During the 2020 offseason, Dak was entering the final year of his rookie deal, but Jerry chose to use a franchise tag instead of signing him to a long-term extension. This was a massive gamble that told the quarterback he wasn't quite worth the full commitment yet, and it created a tense standoff that lasted throughout the entire summer. Dak played under the tag and was actually playing some of the best ball of his career, but then everything changed in week 5 against the Giants. He planted his foot on a scramble and his ankle snapped, resulting in a compound fracture that ended his season and led to a 6-10 finish for the team. He would eventually come back in 2021 and signed a 4-year, $160 million extension to stay in Dallas though. Dak would throw 37 touchdowns that year as the Cowboys won 12 games and led the entire league in scoring. It was the best offense the city had seen in years, but it all came crashing down in the home playoff game against San Francisco. Dak scrambled and slid to stop the clock with seconds left, but the refs ruled that the time had already run out before they could snap the ball to spike it. The game was over, ending in a 23-17 loss that felt like a punch to the gut. It was a kind of ending that defines this era, where a 12-win team doesn't get beat by a great play, but instead gets strangled by a clock error. The following year resulted in another 12-5 record and a wildcard win over Tampa Bay, which actually felt like some progress. Then came the divisional round against the 49ers, where the final play featured Ezekiel Elliott lining up at center because the team had no timeouts left. He snapped the ball, got immediately leveled by the defense, and the play went absolutely nowhere. That image of a star running back playing center on the last snap of the season went viral because it captured the lack of organizational discipline that keeps holding this team back. The 2023 season was the absolute peak of my hate watch as an Eagles fan. Dak threw 36 touchdowns and finished second in MVP voting, while CeeDee Lamb caught 135 passes for over 1,700 yards. Dak went 12-5 for the third straight year and scored more points than anyone else, leading Jerry to tell everyone who would listen that this team was built for a Super Bowl. He wasn't just hinting at a deep run, he was stating it as a fact. Then came the wildcard game at home against a 9-8 Packers team that barely even made the tournament. Dallas was down 27-0 at halftime and eventually gave up 48 points, which was the most they had ever allowed in a playoff game. After the blowout, Jerry told the media he was shocked by the result, even though he was the one who built the roster. After winning 16 straight home games and 3 straight 12-win seasons, the Cowboys became the first team in NFL history to win that many games 3 years in a row without making a single conference title game. The 2024 offseason brought yet another massive distraction in the Dak extension. It took until the start of the season that morning for them to get a deal done for 4 years and $240 million. It was a record-setting deal that paid him $60 million a year, making him the highest paid player in history at that time. Jerry used all the usual language about commitment and building for the future, but 9 weeks later, Dak tore his hamstring. The Cowboys finished with a losing record, Mike McCarthy's contract expired, and he was shown the door. Jerry then promoted Brian Schottenheimer to the top spot, even though no other team was looking to hire him as a head coach. The press release went out and the whole cycle started over again with the new coach, the same structure, and the same man making every single decision at the top. If you pull back from the individual moments and start looking at the bigger picture, it becomes very clear what's actually happening. Think about the 1994 split, the Garrett decade, the Zeke contract, and the Jalen Smith bet. Then you had the Mike McCarthy hire, the Dak tag, and the Schottenheimer promotion. Every single one of these decisions follows the exact same internal logic, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Jerry doesn't just want to win because he actually wants to be the reason they won. Those are two completely different things, and for most of NFL history, the teams that actually figured out the difference are the ones with multiple rings. The Patriots built a front office with real depth and accountability until Bill Belichick took it over, while the Chiefs and the Rams have a general manager who operates in lockstep with their coaches. Even the Eagles fired a coach just a few years after bringing them their first chip because the results demanded it. But none of those organizations run through a single person's need to be the face of every move. Dallas runs through one person. That person hasn't separated winning from being seen as the winner since the night Jimmy Johnson walked out of that Orlando dinner. The savior complex shows up everywhere once you see it. Mike McCarthy gets hired because he needs Jerry, and it wasn't because he was the best available option on the market. A proven winner coming back from the year in the wilderness makes Jerry look like the man who restored him, which is exactly how he likes it. Schottenheimer gets hired because he fits the organization and knows Dak, and because the smooth transition means Jerry controls the narrative. None of these searches ended with the Cowboys taking the best coach available because they always end with the coach who makes the most sense inside Jerry's version of the story. The contract negotiations follow the exact same pattern. Jerry doesn't quietly handle business in the offseason like a normal executive. He turns every extension into a public event by dangling the outcome and talking to reporters to create suspense around decisions that other front offices treat as private. The Micah Parsons deal was another one. He was a 2-time All-Pro and a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year finalist in his first 4 seasons, making him one of the 5 or 6 best defensive players in football. The Cowboys ultimately traded him to Green Bay, the same team that had walked into AT&T Stadium and put up 48 points, because his representation wanted to be included in the contract process and Jerry said no. This didn't happen because he was asking for too much money or because Parsons demanded a trade. It happened because someone outside of Jerry's control wanted a seat at the table, and that was one too many people for his liking. When you look at the owner, Jerry's 83 years old. He stated publicly that his goal is to retire as the owner with the most Super Bowl rings, but he currently only has 3 and needs 3 more to tie Robert Kraft. The math requires winning soon, and I'm not sure if that's going to happen. 30 years is a long time to follow the same roster construction cycle and hit the same playoff ceiling. We see the same press conferences and the same results every single year. The Cowboys are good enough to be relevant, but they aren't good enough to win when relevance stops mattering and the trophies are on the line. So there you have it. Subscribe if you're new and watch this next video if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.